But what they found when they looked closely was that all the glass was broken inside the house. And this corroborated the husband's story that she was angry that he had locked her out of the house, and she had taken a lawn chair and thrown it through the window, and that's what broke the glass. So, based on the injuries, based on evidence on the husband, there was obviously an attack there, and they had had a serious scuffle. But at the end of it, they knew who they needed to take away. And in this case, that was the wife that went to jail that day.
When men become a target of abuse, what is your expert opinion about the reaction to this abuse? Do they know how to react to that, especially if it is the first time physical abuse? What are they taught, like women, how to respond to abuse? What is your opinion here?
Well, when a man is the victim of physical abuse, this is a very difficult situation for him to be in, because little boys are taught never to hit girls, but they're never taught what to do when the girl is hitting him. So, as an adult, a man's going to find himself just naturally ill-equipped to know how to respond appropriately. He doesn't want to hurt her, but he doesn't want to endure a physical attack either. How does he go about this? This is very difficult. This comes down in a real crisis, down to just impulse and doing the best that you can. And this is very difficult, because when a woman attacks a man, if he attempts to stop her, if he attempts to push her away just to get her away from him, she might stumble and fall and become injured in the process. And then all of a sudden, the door swings wide open for a claim of abuse, when in fact, he may have been attempting to defend himself, and he's just stronger naturally with upper body strength. So this is a very difficult situation for a man in the middle of a altercation like this. Not only is it a shocking thing, you don't really have much time to think, but you have to act, or this person's trying to hurt you, and they will if you don't act. So very, very difficult, and I think that this is something that we don't equip our young people to know where to draw that line and how to handle a crisis like this. This is not something that's typically openly discussed until it happens. By then, you're in the middle of it, and you're just doing the best you can in a very, very difficult situation. So I think that this is a very difficult spot for men to be in.
And what can you say about this paternal instinct? Everybody is talking about maternal instinct, but earlier, before you mentioned that in your practice you noticed that really exists, and especially in the situation of domestic violence, it can even increase this desire to save the child. Tell us a little bit more about that aspect.
Well, I think that all of us are pretty familiar with the concept of a maternal instinct. But in a domestic violence situation where a man's being attacked and there are children involved, we really must realize that there are paternal instincts to protect children too. And this is one way, it's not uncommon, during a scuffle between a husband and a wife, or two partners that have a child. This is one way that injuries occur when one when one spouse is trying to protect children from the other spouse. Now, when it's a man, when it's the father that's trying to protect that child, and he's going on instinct in the moment of crisis, this is where, you know, we find that he might just, you know, shove her out of the way to attempt to get her away, to keep her from getting close enough to harm him or that child. And it's really important that these types of issues be dealt with directly within marriages and partnerships before disaster strikes, because little children run between their parents in a crisis. They are afraid, they're upset, they're trying to protect one from the other, and they can get seriously injured in that case. And so it's very important for this to be dealt with, I think, just head on, for people to attempt to resolve this. And if it is unresolvable, then they need to look at a safe separation. This is what, when there are children involved, we cannot take chances like that. Not to mention that level of discord, that level of just constant crisis and volatility takes just a very serious toll on children.
How about parents and other relatives, say the victims of false accusations, when all of a sudden mother and father, other relatives discover that their son, you know, who never had a record of abuse, was accused? How does it affect? And the system works the case into to the jail, to further and further. How that impacts the family?
Yes, the entire family system is affected when someone becomes the victim of abuse. It's an emotional drain, I would say. It's a terrible crisis for the extended family too. When we're talking about a male victim, the family's readily aware that this man's going to have very little recourse. And if he's not very careful, he's going to be the one that will go to jail for what's going wrong in that relationship, despite the fact that he is the victim in the scenario. I think that the same sorts of helplessness, anger, upset, the entire family experiences these things as well. When they see their loved one fall into despair, there is a certain despair that they must deal with at that point, because there's not a thing they can do for him. And so we can understand a little bit how helpless family members might feel. There's nothing that can be done. If there's no recourse, if he's tried everything, if it's not working, there's no way to clear his name, especially when their grandchildren are involved. It's a very, very difficult thing for a family to deal with.
What is your suggestions? How can we change, how can we improve the situation that exists as of now?
My recommendation to men who are dealing with abusive women is to start gathering their resources and options. Ideally, they are going to make a safe exit. And the same way as I have dozens of times worked with female victims, I encourage men the very same way to start planning and to be comprehensive about it.
What can we do to change the system?
Oh, the system. I think the first step in changing the system is to make the world at large very well aware that this is a human issue. This affects men and women, both victims and perpetrators, it's very important for the society at large to begin to recognize that this isn't about whether you're a man or a woman, that this happens on both sides of the gender equation. I think once society really understands that that's the case, the bias is going to slip away. People are going to start seeing that, yes, you know, women are victims and perpetrators. Men are victims and perpetrators. We need to address this problem on all sides. We need to close the gaps that allow false accusations to be made and for arrests to be made without evidence. We need to raise the bar on how it is that we deal with domestic violence in this country. And I think that will be a multidisciplinary approach with many different agencies, law enforcement, the legal system, and domestic violence agencies. And I think by opening our minds to the truth of domestic violence, that it crosses gender lines, that's the key. Once we do that, then we can leave certain assumptions at the door, and we can look at a given situation for exactly what it actually is, not what we assume it to be. Then we will see the evidence that we need to make the case that needs to be made against the right person. And
How
that's
is the
critical.
system now? How does the system operate now?
The system as it exists today is biased. We've all been sort of taught that the victim of domestic violence is a woman. It's always a woman, and it's always at the hands of a man. Okay? Well, this we know to be untrue through decades of research. Family conflict studies continue to show that women abuse at near equal rates as men. And that's also, this bias does not include the gay community either, where men are suffering abuse at the hands of their male partners, and women are suffering abuse at the hands of their female partners. So I think that we need to broaden our minds, and the system as it exists today is biased at the core. It's getting better. The tide is turning. People are seeing that there are two sides to this story, and that it doesn't just go one way, like it seems to be. You know, through the years, it's always seemed to go just one way. Well, this is a very complicated issue, and this is a very human issue. It involves the dark side of human nature. And so what we know to be true is that it goes across culture, across socioeconomic status, across gender, across religious belief systems. It crosses about every line there is. What that tells us is that it's a human issue. It affects us all in one way or another, and we need to treat it as such.
You mentioned before that it has a devastating effect on a victim of, say, false allegations. Could you give us some examples, maybe from either your practice or experience, how devastating it is?
I think becoming a victim of domestic violence is a devastating thing, because it attacks so many levels of a person's life and their identity. When a person is accused of domestic violence, or when they are actually victimized, what this means at the start is there's a terrible breach of trust. This is one of the first things that happens to a victim of domestic violence. It's very hard to trust someone again in a close, intimate way. So there are a lot of practical things that are a big problem in trying to get out of a situation like this. Fortunately, there's a lot of help out there to help a person do this. But what this does emotionally is it attacks your identity of yourself, your self-worth, your idea of who you are. Because whereas most people can rationally say that nobody deserves to be abused, the fact that someone that they loved and cared about and trusted completely could treat them so badly attacks something down deeper. And this is why it can be a very devastating effect in the long term. I recommend to anyone who's been in an abusive relationship or has had some sort of abuse come against them, that they seek out a professional that can help them get past it. And don't wait. Do it soon, because this is uncharted territory for most people. Most people, we are not raised to know how to get out of a situation like that. So, and what to do with it. What do you do with it? On the inside of yourself, how do you come to terms with that? And I think that that's the big question. It's about, well, it's easy to say, move on. But how? How do you go about doing that? What's the first step? What's the second step? There are steps between points A and B. And so I recommend that any victim of abuse, in any way, seek out professional help. Because what they can do then is they can take a terrible situation like that. It's akin to being airdropped into the middle of a jungle. You're not prepared. You're ill-equipped. However, the good news is that there are qualified therapists that are very capable and willing to help you get through the other side. And you might think of it as one of the aspects of therapy is you're seeking the help of a wilderness guide. You've been dropped in the middle of the jungle and you don't know the terrain. This is uncharted territory. Find a guide that knows the paths, that knows the hills and the valleys, that knows how to help you get to the other side. And that person can walk through the terrible situation with you, help you to resolve it. Because it's important to realize that just because of an abusive relationship is over does not mean it's resolved. It just means that perhaps you're out of harm's way. You're not dealing directly with that person or not as often. That does not mean that that terrible crisis is resolved within you. So it's very important that you see it through as a victim, that a victim get to the other side of it and adopt the perspective that will allow them to come to terms with it, and then they can move on.
How about victims of false abuse? They never abused, and that they were not really, they never abused anybody, and they were just were in a situation when somebody used the system to accuse them. How do they differ their situation? Have you ever had your experience with falsely accused people who, you know, the effect on them, this, you know, false trust is definitely there, but anything else that is involved in the
I've worked with many people that have been falsely accused of abuse.